Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. The digital revolution is in full swing. We are trying to understand it, get ahead of it, see what's coming down the road in this fast-moving world of ours. Certainly, there's been enough gyrations lately to make everybody scratch their head a little bit. But my view about this is one of optimism, and let's stay focused on the bigger view. And we're going to see if one of our wonderful digital all-stars, Tony Uphoff, who's the former CEO of Thomas, been the CEO of a couple other businesses that he's helped rebuild and get back on the growth path. Going to see what Tony has to say about this. Professor Uphoff, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Dr. Evans, it's always nice to see you. You're looking very healthy and happy.
I feel that way, sir. I feel that way, and I intend to keep feeling that way no matter what the doom and gloom purveyors have to say about things. Tony, real quick, because I want to just get your thoughts on one thing, and then I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this notion. Folks, Tony's got some pretty cool ideas about digital ad fraud. Like this whole world we're living in, it's almost like one of the currencies we deal with now. Maybe it isn't all, the cleanest currency you could ever have. But Tony, I have to ask, just what are your thoughts these days about, on the one hand, you get the media out there like screaming recession and the countdown to recession, and what about this? But then there's also on the other side some pretty powerful fundamentals in the market that I think continue to look pretty good.
Yeah, it is fascinating, Bob. And we had a conversation with our Growth Swarm colleagues, earlier in the week on this. I've rarely ever seen something that is so asymmetric, meaning the drum beats are kind of, envisioning one thing. And if you actually fundamentally look at the core, a lot of the financial performance is really very, very strong. I think what we may be witnessing, Bob, is a couple of things. I think there's a little bit of a pendulum swinging around post-COVID. And so I think the retail stock sector, and to a certain extent, the e-commerce and even stocks like Zoom, Bob, I think, the torrent of growth, most of it unpredicted going into COVID, I think coming out of it, people aren't quite sure how to set expectations, including, frankly, the executives of those companies, right? So, as do-it-yourself projects of fixing up home offices, of the rampant levels of delivery, of needing to expand the number of users on Zoom slows a little bit, which would be normal as we kind of balance things out a little bit. I think this is really a game of mismatched expectations. I also think, and I've mentioned this before in other circles, I'm not an economist certainly, and I'm not qualified to speak about inflation and recession. However, you and I have worked together and managed through four noted recessions. So I do have some experience, as do you, about what that's like. But I will say the reaction that was the first domino to fall on this, which was Netflix, a sell-off of 70% of a business of that size and that scope and that trajectory, to me, is a wild overreaction. It's not an overcorrection, because I don't think it's correct. I think it's a wild overreaction. So there's some fundamental things going on in the market that don't match the fundamentals, at least that I can see. Last point I would make, Bob, that's close to home for our listeners on this particular podcast. The numbers we're seeing, and it feels to me like we throw these numbers around way too casually. The numbers we're seeing, and we're about to see some earnings from some of the major folks coming out this and into next week. The cloud vendors with double-digit growth on top of multi-billion-dollar businesses. We say these things so casually. We talk about $1 trillion valuation of a company, a $2 trillion valuation of a company. Yeah. And I think what's happened is, it's like Spinal Tap. The amps have gone up to 11, so it's lost meaning now. And so I think there is this thing of, oh, you're only going to grow 12%, on top of like $27 billion, or oh, okay. Well, how do I put that into perspective? Anyways, I could go on, and I want to be very clear. I'm not giving any form of stock or economic advice, but I will say I am long on tech, as I always am. And I think for you and I, because we study this so carefully, I think the part that analysts are probably missing that links directly to the market is I think you need to go upstream as an analyst and understand how companies are deploying modern technology today as a part of your analysis of their financial performance.
Yeah.
So for instance, Target is a retailer versus Walmart. I don't need to get any farther into it other than everybody would understand that Walmart is much farther down the road of deploying modern technology and harnessing the power of cloud infrastructure, applications, tools to benefit the customer in ways that, and I'm not picking on Target, but other retailers aren't even in the same stratosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tony, I got to agree with you just on every count. I will be interested as you and I are having this discussion on recording this. It's about an hour away from when Snowflake will release its fiscal Q1 numbers. So 3 months ago, they blew out any expectations on revenue, which grew 106% last quarter. They guided for this quarter. They raised their guidance for this quarter to, I think it's 66%. So here's a company that could come in at 70% growth, and all the geniuses are going to say, "Oh, what the hell? Only 70%." So Tony, I agree with you, and you talked about the analysts perhaps would be wise to try to go upstream and understand how the companies they're covering are using that technology. And I think in a similar way, we can talk about the Cloud Wars top 10, Microsoft did this and Amazon 36%, blah, blah, blah. But what that represents a step back from there is just extraordinary demand from businesses.
You got it.
We're buying all that stuff that
pushes
those growth rates up so high. So I don't think any of these companies are giving it away. So there are businesses who are finding incredible value in it. And whereas in the past, we might have looked at IT investments, or some leaders did, as this is a cost to be, pounded down. And the closer you can get it to zero, the better you are. I just think that would be utter lunacy today. So the whole model of what tech represents and tech investments represent is wildly different in today's market. And I don't see that changing over the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Hey, Bob, I was fortunate enough to be asked to speak at University of California, Irvine's Center for Digital Transformation recently. This is an MBA class. And the professors are phenomenal there. The students were just so bright and so extraordinary. And I used the journey we took Thomas through of creating a platform company and the ultimate sale of the business as a primer for the discussion. I can't tell you how the students really leaned in. And again, these are graduate students. Most all of them are either currently working and attending school or been in the workforce and now getting their MBA. That concept of business model transformation enabled by digital transformation. And I think that's underneath what you just said. And I kind of said it, and I think sometimes I say it almost too casually. Hey, digital transformation leads to business model transformation. They just jumped all over that, Bob. And they gave chapter and verse of companies they're studying and examples and case studies and questions of companies that haven't. And I found it just really crystallized it in my mind. I think you're putting your finger on it. This is not just technology as a percent of revenue or technology as a cost center or whatever the heck it is. This is what is technology enabling us to do to dazzle customers and make more money.
Yeah.
And I think, again, easy. I don't want to sound too glib and make this sound really simplistic. It's not. But I think the difference you and I are illuminating, Bob, is we've gone through generations of this, but we're now hitting an inflection point based on the unbelievable power, particularly of cloud infrastructure, applications and tools, and the agility that it gives these companies. I think we're unleashing a whole new, period, if you will, where if I can use the expression, I think businesses can be so much more creative.
Mhm.
And they don't have to bet the farm on some big, massive, the old days of, the Department of Motor Vehicles would spend, $500 million contracting with a tech firm. It would take them 5 years, and we'd find out the hard way that none of it worked, and they lit the money on fire. You don't hear those stories as much anymore, and the reason you don't is really, I believe, Bob, the step change of the technology itself. But secondarily, I think we are dealing with a completely different mindset, of companies realizing, look, I'm going to be judged as an executive in this company by my ability to harness this technology to transform my business, not transform my IT infrastructure. That's really not my job. And it's not even the CIO's job or the CTO's job, right? My job is to grow the business. And if technology isn't the biggest lever now, I don't know what is, and it really is just such an essential thing. Anyway, sorry to go off on a rant there, but I think it's you're illuminating something that's really, really powerful. And I think maybe we don't, touch on that often enough.
Yeah. Tony, one last thought on this, and then I'd love to get your thoughts about this phenomenon of digital ad fraud and what that means. But I think this is in the range of 25 years ago. We had just started to work together. And at the time we worked at Information Week, the magazine, which also had a conference, and the Information Week 500 was a list that was put together. And when you and I started there, the list was based on the IT budgets, how big they were. And I remember within the first 6 months or so that I know I was working with you, start to talk to some of these companies to see how was coming. My God, don't put my name on that.
I remember it well.
Remember, there was a point at which the more you spend, the better, the higher you go on the list. And then these people were saying, wait a minute, as if because we'd hear those things, and you touched on it about, well, in this industry, the norm is to spend 1.5% of revenue. And nobody ever looked at that more finely and said, well, what are the best performing companies in that sector doing? So we just got a little disconnected from reality, Tony, but wild stuff. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to continue on this thread, but I want to really love to hear you talk a little bit about what you see as, I guess we might call it a little bit of a reckoning that is coming as we've all got accustomed to digital media, and, the digital media companies have every right to try to get out and make an honest living, but you want that living to be honest. And I get the sense from you, you feel that some of them aren't being quite as straightforward and forthcoming as they should be.
Well, I'll tell you what got me thinking about this, and I'm going to guess behind the scenes, it's got a lot of other people thinking about it as well. The rip from the headlines, Elon Musk, looking to acquire Twitter, and whether it's a negotiation tactic or exactly what it is, he comes out with a statement saying, "Gee, I need the Twitter folks to demonstrate to me that bot accounts or fake accounts on Twitter are 5% or less of the total." Now, put aside the fact that Elon Musk would know that upwards of probably 40% of Twitter accounts are fraudulent and are bots. He has 80 million followers. He would know that close to half of those are bots. He's too savvy of somebody that understands technology. But put all that aside. I'm not talking about Elon Musk. What I'm talking about is the fact that we take this for granted. Almost everybody that you talk to, if you say, well, a lot of those are bots, everybody goes, oh yeah, sure, I know that, right? And what's interesting, right? So what it got me to do was to stop and kind of think about it. So let me just, if you don't mind, I'll read this off my phone. The total cost of ad fraud, meaning I bought what I thought was an ad, but it turns out not to have been an ad, it was a machine-to-machine click, was $81 billion in 2022, and it's projected to increase to $100 billion in 2023. According to Intercepted, 31% of iOS apps and 25% of Android app installs are fraudulent. According to Adobe, in 2018, fraud web traffic was 28% of the total, or 66 billion of the total ad spend. So, this isn't new, the idea of ad fraud. Anytime, we have, in essence, things like programmatic, and I'm not picking on any of these technologies. Look, I use them. I have been involved in selling that type of advertising. I'm not trying to pick on them. But the fact of the matter is, the truth is, we have no idea at what level this fraudulent traffic. You now have bots that can fill out forms. So the initial bot that could just simply click and look like something, you have artificial intelligence driving bots looking for areas of content and posting things that are from fraudulent accounts, looking like they're from, thoughtful, well thought through or well backed, accounts. And I'm really less making a statement about fake news or any of those types of things than I am that here's an industry that's been the fastest growing part of advertising by far. But there's been so little scrutiny on this and so little energy exerted against it. Now, I won't name names here, but I will tell you, having a lot of friends of mine who were in the industry in various pieces, whether they run programmatic, offerings or networks, they work for one of the ad networks, or they work at ad agencies. Whenever I get on my soapbox about this and talk about it, and I've been talking about it recently, they'll say, "Hey, Tony, what? Look, at the end of the day, the fraud is priced in." They'll use that term all the time. It's priced in, meaning, hey, look how low the CPMs, or cost per thousand, for your listeners that don't know, I'm sure most do. That's how most advertising is sold, is on a cost per thousand basis. And so, they'll say it's priced in. So I think it could be the height of irony, and I'm not predicting this, but it could be the height of irony that Musk's, what he thought was a sort of a clever way of calling the bluff at Twitter and seeing if he could renegotiate, doesn't actually trip off this reckoning, as you called it, where I think we've hit an inflection point. And part of this has been the duopoly.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult when, too few companies control the marketplace, because it's very difficult to get transparency. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to get competition that drives transparency. But there is no organizing body here. Mm-hmm. There is no one, we can't call Ghostbusters here. There's no, there's no one to call if you feel that you are the victim of ad fraud. Yeah. You're not gonna, quick, give me the phone number for Google. Who do you even call at Google?
Yeah.
Number one, and number two, there's really no one to follow up on it. So I think it's a fascinating area, Bob. And I think, like most things we talk about, I think the answer to this is going to be one of technology. I'm not a big regulatory guy. I'd rather see less regulatory stuff, and I'm not trying to make a case for that. But the really simple answer to this is assuring authenticity. In other words, these are human beings with accounts. So if Twitter decided tomorrow to do away with all the fake accounts, and they could easily do this, the problem with that is they'd have to restate their earnings. Yeah. If Facebook did the same thing, took down all of the fake accounts, they'd have to restate their earnings. So there's a financial disincentive from these companies, and there's a certain component of Google that's similar to this, to not really get too far into this. There is technology that can solve this problem, but I also think, and I wonder, have we cheapened the value of this so much that the average advertiser, Bob, is like, "Hey, big fella, what are you worried about?" Yeah, I get, yeah, I know 50% is wasted. What's the old joke about advertising? But hey, the other 50% appears to be working, and it's priced in. So I'm really only paying 50 cents on the dollar for what I should be paying, right?
Pays for itself. Yeah. Holy crap. Tony, let me just take a second here. I want to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. If you think of world-class gymnast Simone Biles, you think of someone bringing the A game to her sport. the absolute highest level you can think of. And you can get to that level in business as well. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. It's when automation is effortless and therefore allows people to concentrate on innovation. You can find out more at bmc.com/agame. So Tony, it's fascinating. I just have a sense from what you've said. I'm sure you're the people you know who've discussed some of this, when they say, hey, it's priced in, they've kind of conditioned themselves to think that way. And I guess I have the sense, right, from being around the business world in various forms for a long time, if you build a house on shaky ground, right, it might not fall down the first day or the second day or the third day, but at some point, why do that? And I know what you said about the financial disincentives of cleaning out the bots and all that, but somebody's going to come along with a better deal. Somebody's got this notion of transparency. We're seeing more and more of that everywhere. All those discussions about trust and the need for trust in it, the digital natives who are coming up, and they're not going to take sort of the same old crap that everybody else has peddled. I think the broad trends, Tony, are working against this notion of, hey, it's a lot, but it's priced in, so not to worry.
Bob, I would 100% agree with you. And I'll give you an interesting, comparison from a related but different industry. As you know, for several years, I got recruited into a media business that had the Hollywood Reporter, Backstage, Hollywood Creative Directory, and I was brought in to lead a digital transformation of those businesses. And I learned a ton about Hollywood. This same company owned the Nielsen businesses that were a whole series of businesses, but the core of them were around television ratings. And so we embarked on a few strategic initiatives where we look at taking Nielsen data and combining it with the Hollywood Reporter and maybe, creating kind of a Bloomberg terminal for the entertainment industry. And so I got to know the folks pretty well. And as I looked at that business, it was really stunning to me that back then, and this is from 2003 to almost 2007, it was amazing to me that it was still primarily based, the core of it was what they called the family journal. And you had this, you were defined as a Nielsen family, and you were given a book that you filled out. And so you and your wife, Wendy, would at the end of the night, what NCIS, what else did we want? Oh yeah, Hawaii 5-0. Oh yeah. And then you jot it down and these would get turned in. They could never really leap the chasm from that paper journaling to something that was more scalable. So they got some set-top box technology going, but it really, in all honesty, and maybe today it's far better, but back then it was really, really problematic. And I remember having a conversation with the head of research at CBS, who was a very powerful guy. His name was David Poltruck. I don't know if he's still around. I would think he's probably retired. And he was kind of the guy, he was the guy, and he created the concept of demographics, not just total reach numbers, but that's the demo of 18 to 34. So that's actually more valuable and all that kind of stuff. So I was talking to him one day and I was saying, boy, does it bother you, the fragility that you're uplifting these really fragile samples to a broader group and then you're making purchase decisions? And he literally, Bob, looked at me like I had two heads, like, oh, kid, come on. And he looks at me and he goes, all Nielsen is a currency for the buying and selling of television time. He said, that's all it is. And he said, as long as I am willing to go with that currency and the seller is, we can make a market. Without it, we don't have a market. Now, in fairness, back then, cable was growing and booming, but this is a guy who grew up with only three choices.
Yeah.
He grew up with three networks. So it's making me think, to your point, I wonder if this duopoly world we're living in and that three network, where Nielsen ruled the roost, Bob, I'm wondering if there's maybe, in a funny way, we're watching history repeat itself. And again, look, I want to be really clear. I'll acknowledge I live in a glass house, and man, I'm lobbing rocks here. I have grown up in and around digital. You and I ran some of the first digital products that were ever available commercially. And I have struggled with, how do we make sure that all these numbers are accurate?
Yeah.
We've focused on the whole idea of, not only transparency, but frankly, much more on registration and qualification and those types of things. But it feels to me that maybe, Bob, don't know, that we're hitting some sort of a tipping point. I also wonder, to your point, if there isn't a little bit of a demographic change here that is,
Yeah.
the next generation comes up and kind of goes, hey, this is, this is stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
We shouldn't accept this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Tony, there's a parallel, a quick parallel on that with, in some ways, digital currency, Bitcoin, and those sorts of things. To this day, I'm not completely ignorant of it, but pretty close to completely ignorant. And the kids talk, well, it's this. So I think they're going to come in and they're going to expect something that if same way that if somebody comes in and says to them, hey, look, I know you don't want to buy a car, so I'll sell you a half interest in a car, but it'll cost kind of like this. Let's get the hell out of here. I have Lyft, I have Uber, I have other things that I can.
Yeah.
I think they're going to get lost. So but Tony, it does make me think too of this, just to come back, and we'll sort of wrap up on this thing about, I don't want to get caught up in the whole thing. It isn't, we're heading toward it, we're not heading toward it, but it's a mindset. And
Absolutely.
There has been a sort of an accepted thing among elites or establishment or the geniuses who tell the rest of us what to do, that inflation goes up, a recession will take it down. So do the things, pull the levers that cause a recession. And for a long time, most of us just said, oh, well, crap, they got to comply. I don't think people are going to march to that drummer too much anymore, right? It's like,
I think also, Bob, the honest answer is none of us really know. The last official recession that we were in, people forget, was in 2020, which is only 2 years ago, and it lasted for 60 days. And so none of us would have seen it coming, and none of us certainly would have seen it ending quite that quickly. I remember back in 2007, 2008, and you and I both worked with this company. I was one of 30 top executives at a company called UBM, a publicly traded company that we met in New York, and they brought in an economist from some big firm, and he took us through, I'll never forget, it was a 68-page PowerPoint deck. And it was literally just, basically one slide up, you're all going to die, you're hosed, your career's over. I mean, it was brutal. So it's going on and on and on and on and on and on. And he gets towards the end, and people are starting to ask some questions. So I, raised my hand, and I looked at the guy, I'm sorry, his final line was, it will be 10 years before the economy recovers from that. And he was very specific. It will be 10 years before the economy recovers from it. And so I raised my hand. I said, man, this is sobering. And I said, let me ask you something. I said, did you see this coming? Did you predict this? And he said, no. He said, like most, we didn't see this coming. So I said, well, you seem to have remarkable fidelity on how long it's going to last, but you had zero visibility or fidelity whatsoever that it was coming. And he kind of did the what's the old joke about what dogs hear when we and I honestly don't remember what the guy said, but and listen, I want to be really, I'm not trying to make light of anybody. I know folks are nervous, and anytime you get this kind of turbulence, it can get people's attention, but no need to say, you and I have, as I said earlier, have led through 4 official recessions. I will tell you, every single time I look back and realize I wish I'd been more aggressive.
Yeah.
They are such markets of opportunity. And I think your core point that you're making is this is very uneven, meaning you've got companies that are the demand right, for technology is unbelievable. And it's not slowing down, Bob, it's accelerating.
Yeah.
We, as you know, we spend most of our time in Southern California these days. The real estate markets out here, interest rates have gone up, different things are moving around. And I was reading something about the local economy here, and the demand for housing is actually going up.
Yeah.
So the prices, so interest rates have gone up, stock markets, it's actually going up. And what they're really pointing to is these are demographic issues that have nothing to do with the economy.
Yeah.
This is supply and demand, but it's also that you've got people that have either been sitting on the sidelines and looking to either upgrade in housing or get into the housing market. And again, I want to be careful about making light of financial frustration or concern. But I think your point's a really good one, Bob. I think at times like this, we need to take the temperature down just a little bit.
Yeah.
Slow it down.
Yeah.
Make sure you're really understanding what you're looking at. And it's a really good time for executives. Our mutual analyst friend, Scott Vaughn, and I have been talking about this, making sure you're working with your boards of directors and you're working with your executives, that this is not the time to slam the brakes on, because I guarantee you, your competitors are not doing that. This is true at every market under the sun.
Yeah.
So many of them.
Tony's great. I got to tell you, when you were telling the story about that economist who's, your life's over, the world is ending, and this is going to last for 10 years. I don't know, the thought popped into my head, this line from Woody Allen's old movie, Annie Hall. He's talking about, I think he calls them little old ladies at, a summer camp somewhere. And the one says, the food here is terrible. And the other said, yes, it is. And the portions are so small. So the mind is an interesting thing, right? We can convince ourselves that up's down and this and that.
But
honey,
Bob,
good advice.
Bob, I'll never forget the look on that guy's face when I said, so you didn't? And he looked at me like, I must be an idiot. I'm like, I guess I am. I don't know. I don't quite understand. This must be that new math people are talking about.
Tony, fabulous stuff. Really, really interesting as always. Good to see you. And I hope that the next time we'll find, additional interesting stuff to talk about next month. It should be a very lively time between now and then. We'll see how things go, but I'm with you. Let's stay aggressive. And let's remember that these things, even when they hit to whatever degree they do, they can be short-lived. And, participation is a choice. It's voluntary. And
Indeed, my friend.
Don't participate.
Great to see you, Bob.
All right, Tony, thanks a lot. And folks, thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope things are going great for you. Remember, it's a voluntary thing. And I say, don't participate. See you soon.